The call came through on a frequency that hadn't been used in 3 years. A voice he barely recognized. Not because he didn't know it, but because Nancy had never sounded like this. Breathless, raw, terrified. "Sajangnim, please." The Korean honorific cracked on her tongue. "Come home now. She's erasing her. If you don't come now, there won't be anything left of Mina to save." Junho Park had built an empire on reading fear. He knew the difference between panic and performance, between danger and manipulation. But this was primal, the kind of fear that came from watching something sacred being destroyed in real time. He was 40 blocks away, high-rise boardroom, smoke from Cuban cigars curling toward vaulted ceilings, a territorial negotiation that would shift the balance of power in 3 states, men in $1,000 suits waiting for his word. He gave them nothing. No explanation, no dismissal, just the sound of his chair scraping back and his footsteps echoing toward the elevator. The drive was 7 minutes. It felt like drowning. Leather gloves gripping the wheel, knuckles bone white. The city blurring past in streaks of neon and shadow, his mind cycling through scenarios. Intruders, accidents, rival syndicates. Anything that made sense. Welcome back, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed, hit that like button, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our little dark romance family stretch across cities, countries, and time zones. Every click, every comment, every bit of love you leave here helps us keep unraveling these dangerous love stories and high-stakes betrayals together. So find your quiet place, dim the lights, and get ready. Let's begin. Junho moved through the penthouse like a shadow returning to its source. The silence pressed against his eardrums, thick and wrong. His home had never been loud. Mina's world existed in gestures and careful quiet. But this was different. This was the silence of something vital being slowly suffocated. The security panel by the door blinked red. His code had failed. After 15 years of the same sequence, his own home had locked him out. He didn't pause to wonder why. His shoulder hit the reinforced door once, twice. On the third impact, something in the electronic lock gave way with a metallic shriek that echoed through the marble foyer. Nancy stood 10 feet inside. One hand braced against the wall as if the floor had tilted beneath her. Her uniform, always pristine, always pressed, was wrinkled across the left side like she'd been pressed against something, or someone. Her right hand clutched her phone so tightly her knuckles had gone pale against her dark skin. And when she looked up at him, Junho saw something in her eyes he'd never seen before. Not fear. Nancy had never been afraid of him, which was part of why he'd kept her employed when others had lasted less than a week. This was devastation. "She's in there," Nancy whispered. Her voice scraped raw. "I tried to stop her. I tried to." Her breath caught. She locked the door. "I heard Mina trying to breathe and I couldn't." Junho didn't wait for the rest. He moved past her, down the hallway where family photos hung in expensive frames, images of a life he'd constructed with the same precision he used for everything else. Strategic, controlled, perfect. All of it a lie. The nursery door was closed but not locked. He could hear it now. The sound that had been eating at the edges of his consciousness since Nancy's call. Fabric tearing, slow, methodical. And underneath it, the rapid, shallow breathing of a child in distress. His hand closed around the door handle. The metal was cold against his palm, and for just a moment, Junho Park, who had stared down corrupt politicians, rival syndicate heads, and federal prosecutors without blinking, hesitated. Because once he opened this door, once he saw what was happening inside, everything would change. The illusion of the family he'd been trying to build would shatter. The strategic alliance that had taken 2 years to negotiate would collapse, and he would have to face the truth he'd been avoiding for 6 months. That he'd brought a predator into his home and dressed her in Chanel and called her his future wife. He opened the door. The nursery had been designed as a sanctuary. Soft, gray walls, blackout curtains. Mina could control herself. A weighted blanket on the small bed, noise-canceling headphones on the nightstand. Every element carefully chosen by the team of specialists he'd hired to help his daughter navigate a world that felt too loud, Too bright. Too much for her sensitive nervous system. Now it looked like a crime scene. White silk covered the floor in shredded strips, some pieces no larger than his palm. The vintage wedding dress, the one his first wife had worn, the one he'd saved for Mina because it was the only thing that still carried her mother's scent, had been systematically destroyed. Sumin stood in the center of the carnage, fabric shears in her right hand, her designer dress somehow still immaculate despite the violence she'd just committed. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless. She looked like she was posing for a magazine spread titled Elegant Destruction, and at her feet, pressed against the wall like a wounded animal, was Mina. His daughter's small body was rigid with panic, her chest heaving with the kind of desperate breathing that came right before someone passed out. Her hands, so small, so fragile, were clenched around the last piece of silk, a square of fabric no bigger than a handkerchief. The dress's bodice, the part that would have been over her mother's heart. Sumin's eyes tracked to him, and something that might have been relief crossed her face. Junho, thank God, I've been trying to teach her. Step away from her. His voice came out flat, empty, the tone he used right before he ended someone's life. Sumin blinked, her expression shifting to confusion. What? No, you don't understand. She was having a tantrum. She wouldn't let go of this old dress, and I was trying to show her that holding on to the past. Step away. Something in his face must have finally registered because Sumin took a step back, the shears still in her hand. You're being dramatic. I was helping her. She needs to move on. We all do. This obsession with her dead mother is unhealthy. That's when Mina made a sound, not a word. His daughter hadn't spoken in 3 years, but it was a whimper, high and broken, and it was directed at the doorway behind him. Junho turned slightly, just enough to see Nancy moving into the room. She wasn't looking at him or Sumin. Her entire focus was on Mina, and she was making herself smaller, non-threatening, as she crossed the floor through the destroyed silk. It's okay, sweet girl, Nancy murmured, her voice low and steady despite the tremor Junho could see in her hands. I'm right here. You're safe now. Sumin's face twisted. She doesn't need you. She needs discipline. She needs to learn that throwing fits and clinging to ghosts won't. She moved toward Mina, the shears still raised. Nancy moved faster. She put herself between Sumin and the child, and Junho watched the transformation happen in real time. The quiet, unassuming woman who kept her eyes down and her voice soft became something else entirely. Her spine straightened, her shoulders squared, and when she looked at Sumin, there was steel in her gaze that could cut glass. Touch her again, Nancy said softly, and you'll regret it. Sumin laughed. Actually laughed. You're threatening me? You're the help. You're nothing. She lunged. Not at Mina this time. At the piece of silk still clutched in the child's hands. Nancy's arm came up, blocking the movement, and the fabric shears, those sharp, professional-grade scissors, sliced through the sleeve of her uniform and into the flesh beneath. Blood welled immediately, dark against Nancy's skin, dripping onto the white silk at their feet like some kind of macabre painting. Nancy didn't scream, didn't even gasp. She just wrapped her other arm around Mina, shielding the child's body with her own, and held on. That's when Junho moved. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his hand closing around Sumin's wrist with enough force to make bones grind together. The shears clattered to the floor. He spun her around, walking her backward until her spine hit the wall, his forearm across her throat applying just enough pressure to make breathing difficult. Neo Micheoseo? The Korean came out in a hiss. Are you crazy? Sumin's eyes went wide, her hands coming up to claw at his arm. Junho, please. I didn't mean. She got in the way. He wasn't listening. His gaze had shifted past her to the floor where Mina sat wrapped in Nancy's arms. His daughter's small hands were pressed against Nancy's bleeding arm, not in horror but in some desperate attempt to stop the flow, and she was looking at Nancy like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. Not at him, at Nancy. The woman he'd hired to clean his home had become the person his daughter trusted most in the world, and he hadn't even noticed. Behind him, Nancy's voice was soft but urgent. Sajangnim, Mina needs you to breathe. She's watching you. She needs to see you're calm. The words cut through the red haze, clouding his vision. He looked down at Sumin, at the woman he'd planned to marry, and saw a stranger. Had she always been this? Or had he just been too focused on the strategic value of the alliance to notice the monster underneath the expensive clothes and perfect smile? He released her, stepping back, and Sumin collapsed against the wall, gasping. "You don't understand," she wheezed. "I was trying to help. That child is broken. She needs—" "Get out." Sumin's head snapped up. "What?" "Get out of this room. Now. Before I forget that there are consequences for killing you." For the first time, real fear crossed Sumin's face. She looked at him, then at Nancy, and Mina huddled on the floor, then back at him. "You're choosing them over me? Over our agreement?" "Over." "Out." She went, stumbling over the shredded silk, her perfect composure finally cracking. The door slammed behind her, and the silence that followed felt like the aftermath of an explosion. Junho turned slowly, his body moving through molasses, until he faced his daughter and the woman bleeding for her. Nancy had pulled Mina into her lap, one arm still wrapped protectively around the child despite the blood seeping through her uniform. Mina had both hands pressed against the wound now, and her eyes, those dark, expressive eyes that held everything she couldn't say, were streaming with silent tears. "Let me see." Junho knelt beside them, reaching for Nancy's arm. She pulled back slightly, an instinctive movement, then forced herself still. Her jaw was tight, her breathing controlled, but he could see the pain etched in the lines around her mouth. "It's not deep," she said quietly. She didn't hit muscle. "You're bleeding on my floor. Your floor has seen worse." The comment was so unexpected, so absurdly accurate, that Junho almost smiled. Almost. "How long?" he asked instead. Nancy's eyes met his, and understanding passed between them. 3 months. Since 2 weeks after I started. She began with small things. Comments about Mina being too sensitive, too difficult. Then it escalated. "And you didn't tell me." "I tried." Her voice was gentle but firm. "Twice. You were busy, and Sumin was always there, with explanations that sounded reasonable. That made me sound paranoid." He had dismissed her. He remembered now, vaguely, Nancy approaching him about Mina seeming more withdrawn. He'd assumed it was adjustment to having a woman in the house again. He'd been wrong. Mina made another sound, this one directed at him, and when he looked at her, his daughter was holding out the piece of silk she'd protected. Her mother's dress, her most precious possession. She was offering it to him like an apology, like she thought this was somehow her fault. Junho's chest constricted. He took the silk carefully, his scarred hands gentle around the delicate fabric, and then he did something he hadn't done since his wife died. He gathered his daughter into his arms and held on. Mina was small against his chest, barely weighing anything at all, and Junho realized with sick clarity that she'd gotten smaller since Sumin moved in. Thinner, more fragile. He'd attributed it to normal childhood fluctuations, but now, holding her properly for the first time in months, he could feel each rib through her shirt. What else had he missed? Nancy was trying to stand, using the wall for support, her wounded arm cradled against her stomach. Blood had soaked through the makeshift pressure she'd applied, dripping onto the silk-strewn floor in steady drops that sounded too loud in the quiet room. "Sit down," Junho commanded, the automatic authority in his voice making her freeze mid-movement. "I need to clean this up before—" "Sit down." She sat, more from shock than obedience, he thought. Nancy had never responded to his commands the way his men did, with that instant, unquestioning compliance born of fear. She always paused, considered, then chose to follow through, like she was humoring him. It should have irritated him. Instead, he'd found it refreshing. Now, watching her try to maintain composure while bleeding from a wound she'd taken protecting his child, he found it something else entirely. Something that sat heavy and uncomfortable in his chest like shame. Mina squirmed in his arms, not trying to escape but to see Nancy. Her small hand reached out, and Junho adjusted his hold so his daughter could maintain contact with the woman who'd become her guardian without him even noticing. "The first aid kit is in the kitchen," Nancy said quietly. Top cabinet on the left. I'll need. I know where it is. He did, though he'd never used it. Nancy had been the one to handle every scraped knee, every minor household injury. He'd been too busy building empires and negotiating alliances, too busy to notice his daughter was being destroyed. He stood with Mina still in his arms. She was clutching the piece of silk in one hand and Nancy's uninjured hand in the other, creating a bridge between them. Stay here, both of you. It wasn't a request, but Nancy nodded anyway. She'd gone pale, he noticed. The blood loss wasn't severe enough to be life-threatening, but it was more than enough to cause problems if left untreated. The trip to the kitchen and back took less than 3 minutes, but by the time he returned, Sumin had reappeared in the doorway. She'd composed herself, fixed her hair, reapplied her lipstick, like the last 15 minutes had been a minor inconvenience rather than her revealing herself as a monster. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm and reasonable. "About what happened. About boundaries and discipline and get out of my sight." Junho didn't look at her. He was too focused on Nancy's arm, on the precise way the blood flow had slowed but not stopped. "You're being unreasonable. I was trying to help Mina move past her trauma. Clinging to that dress is unhealthy. Any child psychologist would tell you. Any child psychologist would tell me that destroying her last connection to her dead mother while she watched is psychological torture." He set the first aid kit down, finally turning to face his fiancée. "Get out, now. Before I have you removed." Sumin's mask slipped again, and underneath it was something cold and calculating. "You're really going to throw away everything we've built? The alliance between our families? The trade agreements? The political connections? All for what? A damaged child and the maid?" The silence that followed was absolute. Then Nancy laughed. It was a soft sound, nearly inaudible, but it carried something that made Sumin stiffen. "You really don't understand, do you?" Nancy's voice was steady despite her injury. "You thought you were building something, but you can't build on a foundation you're actively destroying. This man," she gestured toward Junho with her uninjured hand, "might be cold, might be ruthless, might run an empire built on fear and violence, but his daughter is the one thing he'd burn the world for. And you just forced him to choose." Sumin's perfect face twisted with contempt. "She's mute, she's weak, she's useless to the syndicate. I was doing him a favor, clearing the path for." Junho moved so fast, Sumin didn't have time to flinch. One moment he was kneeling beside Nancy. The next his hand was wrapped around Sumin's throat, backing her out of the nursery and into the hallway beyond. The door slammed shut behind them, but not before Mina pressed her face into Nancy's shoulder, small body trembling. The hallway was lined with security cameras. "Good. Let this be recorded. Let everyone see what came next. Do you think I built this empire on stupidity?" His voice was conversational, almost pleasant, which made it more terrifying. "Do you think I survived 2 decades in this business by missing obvious threats?" Sumin clawed at his wrist, her perfect manicure scratching uselessly against his skin. "Junho, please. I knew you were ambitious. I knew you wanted power. I even knew you saw Mina as an obstacle." He leaned in closer, his breath ghosting across her ear. "What I needed to know was how far you'd go. What you'd do when you thought no one was watching." Her eyes went wide. "What?" "The business trip to Seoul. I never left New York. I've been watching Sumin, waiting to see if you'd show me what you really were." He released her, letting her stumble back against the opposite wall. "Congratulations. You exceeded my worst expectations. You were testing me, and you failed spectacularly." Behind them, the elevator chimed. 3 of his men stepped out. Not the head of security, he noticed with cold satisfaction. He'd deal with that particular betrayal later. These were men he'd known since childhood, men whose loyalty was absolute. "Take her to the guest wing. Lock her in. No phone, no computer, no contact with anyone. If she tries to leave, restrain her. I don't care how it looks." Junho turned back toward the nursery, dismissing Sumin like she was already a ghost. "We'll deal with the fallout in the morning." "You can't do this!" Sumin's voice rose to a shriek as hands closed around her arms. "My father will destroy you. The alliance. Your father is currently watching footage of you destroying my daughter's most precious possession. while calling her garbage. He pulled out his phone, showing her the active video feed. I may have installed additional cameras in the nursery 3 weeks ago. Hidden ones, the kind Nancy didn't even know about. He'd been suspicious. Not enough to act, but enough to prepare. And now he had everything he needed. Soo-min went limp in the guard's grip, her face draining of color as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. Junho, please. We can fix this. I'll apologize to Mina. You'll be lucky if an apology is all I require. He nodded to his men, and they dragged her toward the guest wing, her protests fading as they rounded the corner. Junho stood alone in the hallway, surrounded by silk-covered floor and blood drops and the ruins of the perfect life he'd tried to construct. His phone buzzed, messages flooding in from the elders, from Soo-min's father, from a dozen other syndicate heads who'd been watching the feed he deliberately broadcast to them. Good. Let them see what happened to people who touched his daughter. When he opened the nursery door again, he found Nancy had managed to apply a basic bandage to her arm using supplies from the kit one-handed. It was clumsy, already seeping through, but functional. Mina sat beside her, the piece of silk now tucked into her pocket, her small hand resting on Nancy's knee like she was afraid the woman would disappear. Let me do that properly. Junho knelt again, carefully peeling away Nancy's makeshift bandage. The wound was clean, surprisingly so given the violence of how it had happened. 4 inches long, not deep enough to require stitches but close. It would scar. I'm sorry, Nancy said quietly. He paused, antiseptic-soaked gauze in hand. For what? For not being stronger. For not stopping her sooner. For letting it get this far. You took a blade meant for my daughter. He resumed cleaning the wound, his touch as gentle as he could manage with hands more accustomed to violence than healing. You have nothing to apologize for. I should have made you listen. Should have found a way to make you see. I should have been looking. The words came out harsher than he'd intended. This is my failure, not yours. Mina made a soft sound, and both adults looked at her. She was staring at Junho with those expressive eyes, and slowly, deliberately, she shook her head. Not your fault, her gesture said. Not anyone's fault but the monster who did this. His daughter, who hadn't communicated with him in meaningful ways for months, was trying to absolve him of guilt. The irony was almost unbearable. She's been protecting me, Nancy said softly, reading his expression. These past few months, trying to shield me from Soo-min's anger when I intervened. She'd distract her, take the focus back onto herself. Mina's been the brave one, Sajang-nim. Not me. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw it. The careful way she watched doorways, the tension in her small shoulders even now, in relative safety, the hypervigilance of a child who'd learned to read danger in tiny shifts of expression and body language. She'd been surviving. In his own home, his daughter had been in survival mode, and he'd been too blind to see it. No more, he said, the promise directed at both of them. No more tests. No more second chances for people who hurt you. No more, his voice caught. No more failing to protect the people who matter. He finished bandaging Nancy's arm in silence, aware of Mina watching every movement, cataloging his gentleness with the same careful attention she gave everything else. When he was done, he sat back on his heels. How bad is it? Nancy asked, nodding toward the closed door. The political fallout, catastrophic. The Choi family will want blood. My father will be furious. Half the elders will call for my head for breaking the alliance. He shrugged. I don't care. You should care. This could fracture the syndicate. Let it fracture. He met her eyes, and something passed between them. An understanding, perhaps, or a recognition. I've built empires and destroyed rivals and made men twice my age, Beau, but I couldn't keep my daughter safe in her own home. What good is any of it? Nancy's expression softened. You're here now. I should have been here before. Maybe. She shifted, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at her wound. But you're here for what comes next. That's what matters. What came next was going to be ugly. He knew that. The Choi family wouldn't accept this humiliation quietly. His father would invoke tradition, obligation, the good of the syndicate. There would be attempts at reconciliation, then threats, then violence. And through it all, he'd have to find a way to help his daughter heal from months of systematic psychological torture that he'd been too blind to see. But as he looked at Mina, curled against Nancy's side with her small hand clutching the only piece of her mother she had left, Junho felt something shift inside him. The cold calculation that had ruled his life for 2 decades cracked, and underneath it was something raw. Rage. Pure and absolute, not the hot, explosive kind that led to mistakes. This was ice and patience, and the absolute certainty that Sumin would pay for every moment of fear she'd inflicted on his daughter. But first, there was something more important to handle. "Mina," he said softly, waiting until his daughter's eyes met his. "I need to know everything. Every time she hurt you, every word she said, every moment you were scared. Can you show me?" His daughter's face crumpled, and for a moment, Junho thought she'd retreat into herself the way she had so many times before. Instead, she reached for his hand. The first time she'd initiated physical contact with him in over a year, and held on. Then, slowly, painfully, she began to tell him, not with words, but with gestures and careful pantomimes and expressions that broke his heart with every revelation. And Nancy sat beside them, translating when needed, her steady presence the only thing keeping either of them grounded as the full scope of Sumin's cruelty was finally, completely revealed. The sun had set by the time Mina finished telling her story in the only language she had. The nursery had grown dark except for a small lamp in the corner that cast everything in amber shadows. Junho's hands were steady as he watched his daughter's gestures, but inside, something was systematically destroying every cell of restraint he'd spent years building. Sumin hadn't just been cruel. She'd been calculated. The comments about Mina being broken had started within weeks of moving in. Little observations, always delivered when Junho was distracted, always framed as concern. Then came the rules. No stimming. No retreating to quiet spaces when overwhelmed. No using the noise-canceling headphones during meals because it was rude. Every coping mechanism Mina's therapists had carefully built was systematically stripped away, replaced with demands for normalcy that a traumatized, nonverbal 9-year-old couldn't possibly meet. And when Mina inevitably failed, Sumin's displeasure manifested in ways that left no visible marks. Meals withheld, favorite toys disappearing, and worst of all, the constant dripping poison of being told she was defective, useless, an embarrassment to the park name. "How long has she been destroying your mother's things?" Junho asked, his voice carefully neutral even as his hands clenched into fists. Mina held up 3 fingers. 3 months, half the time Sumin had lived here. And the dress? Today wasn't the first time she touched it? His daughter shook her head, then made a gesture. Something being slowly cut away, piece by piece. Sumin had been destroying the dress gradually, taking small sections Mina wouldn't immediately notice, until today, when she'd decided to finish the job. She was erasing her, Nancy said softly. Not just the physical items. She was trying to erase Mina's memory of having a mother at all, to make herself the only maternal figure Mina could remember. Junho turned to look at her. Nancy was still pale from blood loss, cradling her bandaged arm, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "You knew this was happening," I suspected. "But Mina wouldn't tell me everything." "She was." Nancy paused, choosing her words carefully. "Protecting you. She didn't want you to have to choose between her and Sumin. She thought if she could just endure until the wedding, maybe Sumin would be satisfied and the cruelty would stop." The words hit him like physical blows. His 9-year-old daughter had been trying to protect him, had been weighing her own suffering against his political needs and deciding her pain was acceptable collateral damage. What had he done to her? What kind of father had he become that his child thought her worth was measured in strategic value? "Check the bunny, sir." Nancy's words cut through his spiral. He looked at her, confused. "Mina's plush rabbit. The one she sleeps with. Check it." He found the stuffed animal on the bed, half buried under pillows. It was worn soft from years of being held, one ear slightly torn. Junho had never paid much attention to it beyond noting that Mina refused to sleep without it. Now, examining it closely, he found what Nancy had been telling him to look for. A small incision in the seam, carefully stitched back, closed but still visible if you knew where to look. "Open it," Nancy instructed. Inside, nestled in the stuffing, was a micro SD card and a lens so small it was barely visible. A camera. Someone had put a camera inside his daughter's most beloved possession. "I sewed it in 9 weeks ago," Nancy admitted. After the third time, Sumin locked Mina in the bathroom for misbehaving, and I couldn't prove it had happened. I needed evidence. Something you couldn't dismiss or explain away. Junho stared at her. This woman, this quiet, unassuming woman he'd hired to keep his home clean, had been conducting a covert surveillance operation under his nose, had been protecting his daughter with the kind of strategic thinking he employed in his business. "Who are you?" The question came out before he could stop it. Nancy's expression didn't change. "Someone who recognized what was happening to Mina because I'd seen it before. In my previous work." "Your previous work cleaning houses?" "No." She met his eyes steadily. "My previous work treating traumatized children whose parents were too busy building empires to notice they were being destroyed from the inside." The admission hung in the air between them. Nancy wasn't just a maid, had never been just a maid. She was something else entirely. Something he'd failed to recognize because he'd been too comfortable with the lie of her invisibility. "We'll discuss this later," he said, though they both knew it was a temporary reprieve. "Right now I need to see what's on that card." He pulled out his phone, retrieved the card from the bunny's stuffing, and inserted it into an adapter. The video that loaded made his blood run cold. It was weeks of footage, carefully edited into a timeline of abuse. Sumin's voice, sharp and cutting, telling Mina she was worthless. Sumin destroying drawings Mina had made. Sumin withholding meals, locking doors, creating a systematic pattern of psychological torture that would make even his most ruthless enemies pause. And through it all, Nancy, moving through the frame like a ghost, intervening when she could, documenting when she couldn't, keeping Mina alive and relatively sane through sheer force of will. "She called her mute garbage," Junho noted, his voice flat as he watched Sumin's lips form the words. "More than once. That was one of her favorites," Nancy confirmed. "She had others. Broken thing. Useless heir. Genetic mistake." Each word was another nail in Sumin's coffin. Junho continued watching, his expression never changing, but Nancy could see the muscles in his jaw working, could see the way his free hand had curled into a fist so tight his knuckles had gone white. Then he did something unexpected. He opened a group chat on his phone, one that included every elder in the Park Syndicate, every major player in the Korean organized crime network in North America, and notably, Chairman Choi, Sumin's father, and he streamed the video, live, unedited, every damning second of his fiancée's systematic destruction of his daughter. "What are you doing?" Nancy asked, though she thought she knew. "Ending this." His voice was cold enough to freeze blood. No private conversations, no backroom deals, no chances for the Choi family to spin this as a misunderstanding or a discipline issue. Everyone sees exactly what she is. Now. Tonight. His phone exploded with notifications, calls, texts, voice messages piling up so fast the device couldn't process them all. He ignored every single one, letting the video play through to its conclusion. The final clip was from today. Sumin standing over Mina with the fabric shears, saying clearly into the camera, "She needs to learn that clinging to ghosts is pathetic. Your father will thank me once she's properly broken and we can send her somewhere she won't be an embarrassment anymore." The video ended. Silence. Then his phone rang. Not a number from the group chat. His father, Chairman Park himself. Junho answered, putting it on speaker. "Yes? Are you insane?" His father's voice was tight with rage. "Do you understand what you've just done? The Choi family will demand blood for this humiliation. You've destroyed an alliance that took years to build. She tortured my daughter. She was disciplining a difficult child. This is what happens when you let weakness fester. Mina needs structure. She needs to be safe in her own home." Junho's voice cut through his father's tirade like a blade. "She needs to not be called garbage by the woman who was supposed to be her mother. He looked at Mina, who was watching him with those dark, careful eyes. "She needs a father who actually protects her." That child is a liability, Chairman Park said, and Nancy watched Mina flinch at the words even through the phone speaker. Nonverbal, traumatized, useless for carrying on the family line. The Choi alliance would have given you legitimate heirs, strong ones, and you're throwing it all away for my daughter. The words were final, absolute. I'm throwing it away for my daughter. If that makes me weak in your eyes, so be it. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Then, slowly, Chairman Park spoke again, and his voice carried a weight that made even Junho's expression tighten. You're choosing her over the syndicate, over your obligations, over the family legacy. I'm choosing her over everything. Then you're a fool. The line went dead. Junho set the phone down carefully, like it might explode. His hands were steady, but Nancy could see the cost of that steadiness in the rigid set of his shoulders, the careful control of his breathing. That's it, then, Nancy said quietly. You've just declared war on your own family. No. He looked at her, and something in his expression had changed. The ice was still there, but underneath it was something molten and dangerous. I've just declared what my priorities are. They can accept it, or they can try to change my mind. But they won't succeed. His phone buzzed again. This time, a message from the group chat. Chairman Choi, Soo-min's father, requesting an immediate meeting. Neutral ground. Representatives from both families. They want to negotiate, Nancy observed. They want to save face. Junho typed a response with swift, precise movements. Fine. We'll meet, but not at neutral ground. He named a location. One of his own properties. A restaurant he owned in Koreatown. The message was clear. This wasn't a negotiation between equals. This was Junho dictating terms. What are you going to do? Nancy asked. He looked at Mina, who had moved closer to him during the phone call, her small hand resting on his knee like she was anchoring him to something. I'm going to make sure everyone understands that touching my daughter, hurting her, threatening her, even looking at her wrong, carries consequences they can't afford to pay. They'll try to use Soo-min's pregnancy claim, Nancy warned. Traditional families. They'll say you have an obligation. Then it's lucky I have someone who can prove she's lying. He gestured to her bandaged arm. You found the hormone injections. You have evidence. I do. But using it means explaining how I found them. Explaining what I was doing, going through her trash, monitoring her that closely. Nancy's voice was steady. It means revealing that I'm not who I said I was when you hired me. I know. Junho stood, then carefully lifted Mina into his arms. His daughter wrapped herself around him like she used to when she was younger, before the world had taught her that trust was dangerous. And we'll discuss that. Everything about who you really are and why you're here. But right now, you need to prepare for war, Nancy finished. No. He adjusted his hold on Mina, supporting her weight easily. Right now, I need to make sure my daughter knows she's safe, that she's valued, that she matters more than empires or alliances or anything else in this world. He moved toward the door, then paused. The meeting with the Choi is in 2 hours. You're coming with me. I'm the help. I don't belong in syndicate negotiations. You're the witness, the one who documented everything, the one who bled protecting my daughter. His eyes met hers, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. You belong wherever I say you belong, and right now I need you there. It wasn't a request. But then, nothing Junho Park said was ever really a request. Nancy stood, her injured arm throbbing with the movement. I'll need to change. I can't go to a formal meeting covered in blood. There's a guest room on the 2nd floor. Take whatever you need. He moved toward the door, Mina still clutched in his arms. And Nancy? Thank you. For keeping her alive, for being what I failed to be. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone in the destroyed nursery with the evidence of his fiancé's cruelty scattered across the floor like accusations. Nancy looked at the shredded silk, the bloodstains, the broken toys and torn drawings. Then she looked at her reflection in the window, a woman in a ruined uniform, arm bandaged and throbbing, who just inserted herself into a power struggle that could get her killed. She should leave. Should pack her things and disappear before the Choi family decided she was a loose end that needed eliminating. Should protect herself the way she'd learned to protect herself after the last time she'd gotten involved in something that wasn't her business. Instead, she headed toward the guest room to find something appropriate for a syndicate meeting. Because Mina needed her. And somehow, in 6 months of careful distance and professional boundaries, that little girl's safety had become more important than her own. The guest room was decorated in shades of gray and cream. Expensive, but impersonal. Nancy found the closet already stocked with women's clothing. Sumin's overflow wardrobe, she realized. Designer labels, perfect tailoring, everything in sizes that would swallow Nancy's more compact frame. She bypassed them all, choosing instead a simple black dress that looked like it had never been worn. The fabric was quality, understated elegance rather than flashy wealth. It would do. Changing was awkward with her injured arm, and by the time she'd managed to zip the dress and find shoes that fit well enough, her bandage was seeping through again. She was examining it in the bathroom mirror when someone knocked. "Come in." Junho entered carrying a proper first aid kit. The professional kind, not the basic household version. He'd changed too, she noticed. A 3-piece suit in charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the kind of outfit that cost more than most people made in a month. He looked every inch the syndicate head, cold and untouchable, except for his eyes. Those were still carrying the weight of everything Mina had shown him. "You're bleeding through," he observed, setting the kit on the bathroom counter. "It's fine. I can. Sit." Nancy sat on the edge of the bathtub, recognizing the tone. Not the same voice he used with his men. That was all authority and expectation of obedience. This was something else. Something that expected cooperation because he was asking, not commanding. Subtle difference, but it mattered. He knelt in front of her, already unwrapping the soaked bandage with careful precision. His hands were large, scarred across the knuckles, the hands of someone who'd done violence personally rather than just ordering it. But they were gentle as they peeled away the gauze, gentle as they cleaned the wound again. "You should be resting, not using this arm like nothing happened," he said, examining the gash. "Probably, but I wasn't about to leave Mina alone long enough to go to a hospital." "You couldn't have called for a doctor? And risk whoever showed up being on Sumin's payroll? Or your father's?" Nancy met his eyes steadily. "I trusted exactly one person in this building to prioritize that child's safety, and he wasn't here." The words landed like she'd intended them to. Not as an attack, but as a statement of fact. Junho's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "You're right." He applied antibiotic ointment with the same careful precision. "I wasn't here. I was too busy playing chess with my father and the Choi family, too focused on maintaining strategic advantages." He started wrapping fresh gauze. "Too blind to see what was happening in my own home. Sumin was good at hiding it. She'd wait until you were distracted, until witnesses were scarce. She'd time her cruelty perfectly. But you saw it. I was looking." Nancy watched him secure the bandage with medical tape, his movements practiced. "That's the difference. I didn't assume everything was fine just because it looked fine on the surface." He finished, sitting back on his heels but not standing. They were at eye level now, close enough that Nancy could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, could smell the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with something sharper. Stress, maybe, or rage carefully contained. "Why?" he asked. "You're not just a maid. We both know that now. So why take this job? Why stay when you recognized what was happening? Why bleed for a child you have no connection to?" Nancy was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth to give him. Then she decided that after everything that had happened, he deserved at least part of it. "I'm a child psychologist. Was, anyway. I specialized in trauma, particularly selective mutism and developmental delays caused by adverse childhood experiences." She looked at her bandaged arm. 3 years ago, I was treating a little boy whose symptoms were a lot like Mina's. Nonverbal, hypervigilant, difficulty with emotional regulation. His mother insisted he was just shy, that he needed more discipline. What happened? I filed a report with Child Services, standard protocol when you suspect abuse. Except the family was connected. Not syndicate, but political power, which is sometimes worse. Her voice was steady, matter of fact. 2 days later, someone broke into my office, destroyed my patient files, left a message that made it very clear what would happen if I pushed the issue further. And the boy? Dead within 6 months. Officially ruled an accident. Unofficial truth was that his mother's boyfriend beat him so badly his brain swelled. He died in the hospital before they could operate. Nancy's hands clenched in her lap. I couldn't save him because I didn't have proof, because I followed proper channels and gave them time to cover their tracks. Junho was very still, his expression unreadable. So you ran. I relocated, changed my name, buried my credentials, took a job where I could disappear. She met his eyes. And then the agency sent me to work for a single father whose daughter showed all the same signs of trauma I'd seen before. I told myself I'd just do my job. Keep my head down, not get involved. But you did get involved. I couldn't not. Her voice cracked slightly. I saw Mina flinching. Saw her going silent in ways that weren't natural even for her condition. Saw Sumin's carefully constructed facade and recognized it for what it was. And I knew. She took a shaky breath. I knew that if I walked away, if I let it happen again, that little boy's death would have meant nothing. Understanding flickered across Junho's face. You're trying to save him by saving her. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just trying to live with myself. Nancy gestured toward the door. Either way, here we are. You've got your truth about me. Now you get to decide what to do with it. What I'm going to do, Junho said quietly, is make sure you're never in a position to regret staying. He stood, offering her his hand. And I'm going to make sure my daughter knows that the woman who protected her when I didn't is never dismissed as just the help again. Nancy took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. They stood close. Closer than was strictly professional. And for a moment something passed between them. Recognition? Maybe. Or respect? Or something more complicated that neither of them was ready to name. We have 40 minutes before the meeting, Junho said, not stepping back. Is there anything else I should know? Any other revelations that are going to surface? Just one. Nancy reached into her pocket and pulled out a small prescription bottle. These are Mina's vitamins. Or they're supposed to be. Sumin's been swapping them. He took the bottle, examining the label. It was correct. The prescription matched what Mina's pediatrician had ordered, but when he opened it and spilled several tablets into his palm, they were the wrong shape, wrong color. What are they really? Sedatives, high-dose benzodiazepines that would make an adult drowsy. In a 9-year-old system, they'd be powerful enough to cause severe lethargy, confusion, and muscle weakness. Nancy's voice was clinical, detached. She was drugging Mina to make her appear more dysfunctional than she actually is. To make your father and the elders see her as a liability that needed to be removed. The bottle cracked in Junho's grip. How long? At least 2 months, maybe longer. I only found them 3 weeks ago when I was cleaning and noticed Mina seemed more alert on days when Sumin was out of the house. Nancy watched his face carefully. I've been diluting the doses when I could, swapping some tablets out with actual vitamins. It's why Mina's been improving slightly, but I couldn't stop it completely without Sumin noticing. She was poisoning my daughter, slowly, systematically. His voice had gone flat again, that dangerous calm that preceded violence, making her appear defective so she could justify sending her away. Or worse, Nancy said what they'd both been thinking. Sumin made several comments about accidents, about how tragic it would be if something happened to a sick, unstable child. She was building a narrative where Mina's death would seem inevitable. Unfortunate, but not suspicious. Junho's hands clenched into fists, the broken bottle cutting into his palm. He didn't seem to notice the blood. She was going to kill her. She was creating the conditions where she could kill her and have it ruled an accident. Yes. Nancy reached out, carefully prying the broken plastic from his hand. But she didn't, because she had to keep up appearances until after the wedding. And because every time she tried to escalate, I was there, blocking her, disrupting her plans, making it impossible for her to get Mina alone long enough to stage something convincing. Nancy found a towel, wrapping it around his bleeding palm. She hated me for it, called me intrusive, Overprotective. Inappropriate. Tried to get you to fire me at least 4 times. I remember. He dismissed Sumin's complaints as personality conflicts, minor household friction, another failure to add to the growing list. She said you were too attached to Mina, that it was unhealthy. She was right about the attachment. Nancy's voice softened. That little girl got under my skin in ways I didn't expect. I told myself I was being professional, maintaining boundaries, but somewhere along the way, keeping her safe became personal. Is that a problem? Professionally? Yes. Ethically, I should have stepped back, reported to proper authorities, removed myself from the situation. She looked up at him. Practically, it's probably the only reason Mina's still alive. They stood there in the guest bathroom. Nancy holding pressure on his bleeding palm, surrounded by the evidence of Sumin's systematic attempt to destroy his daughter. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. This sharing of truth and guilt and determination. Thank you, Junho said finally, for choosing practically over professionally, for letting it get personal, for being what I should have been. You're here now. That's what matters. Is it? His free hand came up, fingers brushing against her cheek so lightly she might have imagined it. Or have I already lost her? Did you see the way she reached for you instead of me? The way she trusts you more than her own father? She hasn't lost faith in you, Nancy said softly. She's just learned to survive. Once she feels safe again, truly safe. Not just temporarily protected. That trust will come back. But you have to earn it, Sajangnim. You have to show her that you're someone she can rely on even when it's inconvenient or politically costly. I'm trying. I know. She released his hand, the bleeding already slowing. But trying isn't enough. You have to succeed. Because if you fail her again, Nancy's voice hardened, I won't let you near her. Political power, syndicate connections, none of it will matter. I'll take her and disappear, and you'll never find us. It was a threat, clear and absolute, and coming from someone who theoretically had no power at all, it should have been laughable. Instead, Junho found himself believing her, found himself seeing past the modest dress and careful deference to the spine of steel underneath. This woman would absolutely steal his daughter and vanish into whatever network had helped her disappear before. And part of him, the part that recognized strategy and determination when he saw it, respected her for it. Noted, he said. But it won't come to that. I won't fail her again. Good. Nancy stepped back, putting professional distance between them again. Now we should go. Your daughter needs to see you handling this. Needs to know you're fighting for her. She's staying here. With security I actually trust. She's coming with us. At his sharp look, Nancy continued. Not into the meeting itself, but nearby, where she can see you're keeping her close, where she knows you haven't handed her off to staff while you deal with more important things. This meeting is going to get ugly, probably, but leaving her behind will confirm her fear that she's a burden you're trying to minimize. Keeping her close, protected but present, shows her she's your priority. Nancy moved toward the door. Besides, I suspect having Mina visible will change the tone of the negotiation. Hard to justify Sumin's actions when the victim is right there, real and undeniable. Junho considered this, recognizing the strategic wisdom. You think like I do. I think like a woman who's learned that the most dangerous battles are fought in living rooms and boardrooms, not streets. She paused at the threshold. The difference is, I choose my battles based on who needs protecting. You choose yours based on who needs destroying. But right now, we need the same thing. What's that? Sumin's complete annihilation. Socially, politically, and permanently. Junho smiled then, and it was the same smile his enemies saw right before they realized their mistake. Then let's go introduce her to consequences. Mina was waiting in Junho's study, curled into an oversized leather chair that made her look even smaller than she was. She'd been cleaned up, changed into soft cotton pajamas decorated with stars, her dark hair still damp from a bath. One of the household staff, Mrs. Kim, who'd been with the family for a decade, sat nearby doing needlework. The moment Junho entered, Mina's eyes tracked to him with that careful, assessing gaze she'd perfected, checking his mood, looking for signs of danger or dismissal. He knelt beside the chair, bringing himself to her level. "We need to go out for a little while. Somewhere safe, where you'll be protected. But I need you to come with me. Can you do that?" Mina's eyes shifted to Nancy, who'd entered behind him. The question was clear. "Will she be there?" "I'm coming too," Nancy confirmed. "I'll stay with you the whole time." Relief flickered across Mina's small face. She nodded, sliding out of the chair and immediately reaching for Nancy's uninjured hand. Mrs. Kim looked up from her needlework, her expression carefully neutral. "Sa-jung-nim, if I may ask, what happened to Soo-min Sai?" "The other staff are asking." "Soo-min is no longer part of this household," Junho said, his voice carrying absolute finality. "That's all anyone needs to know. If there are questions, direct them to me. And if her family sends people, they won't get past the lobby." He checked his watch. 20 minutes until the meeting. "I'm restructuring security, starting with terminating Dae-jung." Mrs. Kim's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Understanding, maybe, or grim satisfaction. "Dae-jung's been with you since you were boys. Dae-jung accepted bribes to compromise this house's security. Childhood friendship doesn't excuse treason." Junho's voice was cold. "I want him removed from the property tonight. If he resists, have him arrested. I don't care what excuse you use." "Yes," Sa-jung-nim. "And Mrs. Kim? Thank you for keeping Mina safe tonight while I dealt with." He gestured vaguely. "Everything else." The older woman's face softened slightly. "That child deserves better than what she's endured. We all knew something was wrong, but..." She hesitated. "But Soo-min was my choice, and questioning her would have been questioning me." Junho finished. "I understand, but that changes now. If anyone on my staff sees something wrong, I want to know about it immediately. No more silence. No more protecting my feelings over Mina's safety." Mrs. Kim nodded, and something like respect entered her expression. "I'll make sure the others understand." They left through the private elevator, the one that bypassed the main lobby and opened directly into the parking garage. Junho's driver was waiting beside a black SUV with bulletproof glass and reinforced doors. Not the usual vehicle for a business meeting, but these weren't usual circumstances. Mina hesitated at the car door, her small body tensing. Nancy recognized the signs immediately. The vehicle was triggering something, a memory, maybe, of the accident that had killed her mother 3 years ago. "Would you rather walk?" Nancy asked softly. "It's only 6 blocks to the restaurant." Junho started to object. Walking meant exposure, vulnerability, but stopped when he saw his daughter's face. The relief that flooded her features at the option of not getting in the car. "We'll walk," he decided, but with protection. 2 of his men materialized from nearby vehicles, flanking them at a discreet distance as they exited the garage onto the street. Manhattan at night was alive with sound and motion, but in this particular neighborhood, one of Koreatown's quieter sections, the chaos was muted. Mina walked between Nancy and Junho, still holding Nancy's hand, but after half a block she reached out and took her father's hand too. The gesture was tentative, testing, but when he closed his fingers carefully around hers, she didn't pull away. They walked in silence, this strange little family unit, and Nancy found herself memorizing the moment. The weight of Mina's small hand in hers, the protective presence of Junho on the child's other side, the quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted tonight. The restaurant Junho had chosen was upscale Korean, the kind of place where business was conducted over elaborate multi-course meals. But tonight, the dining room had been cleared, leaving only a single large table in the center and security posted at every exit. Chairman Choi had already arrived, seated at the head of the table with 3 of his advisors flanking him. He was older than Junho's father, his face lined with age and authority, wearing traditional hanbok rather than a Western suit. A deliberate choice, Nancy thought, claiming cultural high ground, demanding respect. He looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from stern patience to confusion when he saw Mina. "You brought the child?" His voice carried disapproval. I brought my daughter, Junho corrected. She's the reason we're having this meeting. It seemed appropriate she be present. This is syndicate business. Children have no place. This is about my daughter being tortured by your daughter. That makes it very much her business. Junho guided Mina and Nancy to a side room visible through glass panels but separate from the main dining area. She'll wait here, where I can see her. Where everyone can see her and remember exactly what we're discussing. It was a power move, Nancy realized. Keeping Mina visible made her real, undenounceable. Made it impossible for the men in that room to abstract her into a political problem rather than a traumatized child. The side room had been set up with soft furniture, books, art supplies. One of Mrs. Kim's assistants was already there, ready to keep Mina occupied, but the little girl didn't move toward the toys. She stayed pressed against Nancy's side, watching the adults through the glass with wary eyes. I'll be right there, Nancy promised, crouching to Mina's level. You'll be able to see me the whole time. And if you need me, just tap on the glass. I'll hear you. Mina's hands moved in quick gestures. What if they try to take me away? They won't, Junho answered before Nancy could, having learned enough of his daughter's sign language to understand basic communication. I won't let them. You're staying with me. That's not negotiable. Are you sure? The question, conveyed through a single, complex gesture, carried years of doubt. Of being told she was a burden, a liability, something to be hidden away or discarded. Junho knelt beside Nancy, bringing himself to his daughter's eye level. I'm sure, and I'm sorry you have any reason to doubt it. But Mina, he took both her hands in his. You are my priority. Not alliances, not politics, not what other people think I should value. You. Always you. Mina's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Nancy thought the child might actually speak. Instead, she threw her arms around her father's neck, holding on with desperate strength. Junho gathered her close, one hand cradling the back of her head, and Nancy had to look away from the raw vulnerability in his expression. This man who commanded empires and inspired fear was breaking apart in the arms of his 9-year-old daughter, and the pieces were rearranging into something different, something more human. When Mina finally released him, Junho stood, straightened his suit, and became the Ice King again. But Nancy could see the cracks now, could see the father underneath the syndicate head. Stay with her, he said to the assistant. Then to Nancy, you're with me. They entered the main dining room together, and every eye tracked to Nancy. A black woman in a borrowed dress, bandaged arm obvious, standing beside Junho Park like she belonged there. The confusion on the elders' faces would have been funny if the situation weren't so deadly serious. This is Nancy, Junho said, his voice carrying absolute authority. She's the witness to everything that happened, the one who documented my daughter's abuse, the one who bled protecting Mina when my fiancé decided that shredding a dead woman's wedding dress was appropriate discipline. Chairman Choi's expression darkened. Your help has no place in this negotiation. She's not my help. She's my daughter's protector, and she has more right to be at this table than anyone who's going to defend what Su-min did. Junho pulled out a chair for Nancy, a gesture of respect that made several men shift uncomfortably. Sit. Nancy sat, acutely aware of every eye on her, of the delicate position she'd just been placed in. This wasn't her world. She'd spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of attention, this kind of exposure. But Mina was watching through the glass, and that mattered more than her own safety. Junho took the seat beside her, positioning himself between Nancy and the rest of the table. Another message. Anyone who wanted to threaten her would have to go through him first. Let's be clear about why we're here, Junho began, his voice cold and precise. Your daughter spent months systematically torturing my daughter, drugging her to appear dysfunctional, destroying her only connections to her dead mother, calling her garbage, planning to either have her institutionalized or arrange an accident that would eliminate her entirely. You have proof of these accusations? One of Chairman Choi's advisors asked. Hours of video evidence, medical documentation of the drug substitution, witness testimony. Junho gestured to Nancy, and physical evidence of Su-min's violence when she was interrupted. Your woman could have inflicted that injury herself, the advisor suggested, to frame Soo-min. Before Junho could respond, Nancy spoke up, her voice steady and professional. The wound angle and depth are consistent with a defensive injury sustained while blocking an attack aimed at someone shorter. The blood spatter pattern on the silk fragments confirms I was between Soo-min and Mina when the shears made contact. And the psychological assessment of Mina's trauma responses are consistent with months of systematic abuse, not a single incident. Silence. Then Chairman Choi leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. You're not just a housekeeper. No, I'm not. I'm a child psychologist who specialized in trauma, which means I recognized what was happening to Mina because I've seen it before. And I documented it because I knew no one would believe the word of the help without evidence. Nancy met his gaze steadily. So yes, I have extensive proof. Proof that would hold up in any court. Proof that's already been distributed to every elder in this syndicate. Proof that makes it impossible to claim this was anything other than deliberate, calculated cruelty. The men shifted uncomfortably, recognizing that the narrative they'd planned, write this off as discipline gone too far, smooth over the alliance, make the problem disappear, wasn't going to work. My daughter made mistakes, Chairman Choi admitted slowly. She was perhaps too harsh in her methods, but her intentions were good. She was trying to prepare Mina for the reality that the syndicate has no place for weakness. She was trying to murder a 9-year-old child, Junho said flatly. Let's not dress it up as tough love. That's an extreme interpretation. She was drugging Mina to make her appear defective. She was destroying the child's coping mechanisms and connections to her dead mother. She made statements on camera about hoping for accidents. Junho's voice could cut steel. If you think there's a charitable interpretation of those actions, I'd love to hear it. Chairman Choi was quiet for a long moment, and Nancy could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was weighing options, considering angles, trying to find a way to salvage this situation. What do you want? He asked finally. The alliance is clearly finished. Our families won't be united through marriage. So what do you want from this meeting? Acknowledgement, Junho said simply. Public acknowledgement that Soo-min's actions were indefensible, that no amount of traditional values or tough love justifies what she did, and a guarantee that your family won't retaliate against me or mine for ending the engagement. You're asking me to condemn my own daughter. I'm asking you to be honest about what she is. Junho pulled out his phone, loading the video footage. Watch this, all of it, and then tell me if you can defend her actions. The video played on the large screen that had been set up for the meeting. Every brutal word, every casual cruelty, every moment of Soo-min's systematic destruction of Mina's spirit. The men watched in silence, and Nancy saw several of them flinch at the worst parts. When it ended, Chairman Choi looked like he'd aged a decade. Where is she now? Locked in my guest wing until we determine what to do with her. I'm inclined to turn her over to the police. Let the legal system handle it. But I'm open to alternative solutions if you have suggestions that don't involve her ever being near my daughter again. She's my daughter. The old man's voice was rough with emotion. No matter what she's done, she's still my daughter. I can't. He stopped, gathering himself. What would satisfy you? What would end this without destroying both our families? Soo-min leaves the country, tonight. Goes somewhere she can't hurt anyone else. And she stays gone. Forever. Junho's terms were absolute. You can frame it however you want. Mental health treatment, family business abroad, I don't care. But she doesn't come back to New York. She doesn't contact me or mine. She ceases to exist as far as this syndicate is concerned. That's exile. That's mercy. Because the alternative is me making sure every family in the network knows exactly what she did. Making sure she's blacklisted from ever marrying into power again. Making sure her reputation is so thoroughly destroyed that no one will touch her without remembering she's a child abuser. The threat was clear. Junho was offering exile as the merciful option. The alternative was complete social annihilation. Chairman Choi looked at his advisors, then at the screen still showing his daughter's frozen, cruel expression. Give me 1 week, to arrange transportation, to make explanations to the family. 1 week, and she'll be gone. 48 hours, Junho countered. And she doesn't leave my custody until she's on a plane. I'm not giving her time to run or retaliate. 48 hours, the old man agreed finally. But this ends the alliance between our families. All trade agreements, all cooperation. We're finished. I can live with that. They stood, and Nancy expected the meeting to end there. Instead, Chairman Choi's eyes tracked to the glass where Mina sat watching, her small face pressed against the window. That child, he said slowly, is going to be a problem for you. Nonverbal, traumatized, a visible weakness that your enemies will exploit. Then my enemies will learn what happens when they mistake kindness for weakness. Junho's voice was ice. My daughter is not a liability. She's the reason I do any of this. And anyone who threatens her will discover exactly how ruthless I can be when protecting what's mine. The meeting ended shortly after. Formal bows exchanged, promises made and recorded. When the Choi family and their advisors finally left, Junho stood alone in the center of the empty restaurant, the weight of what he'd just done settling over him. He'd broken a multi-million-dollar alliance. He'd made an enemy of one of the most powerful families in the network. He'd exposed family business to outsiders and prioritized his daughter over syndicate politics. By every measure of the world he'd grown up in, he'd made a catastrophic mistake. But when he looked through the glass and saw Mina's small smile, saw her reaching for him through the barrier, saw the relief in her eyes that said she finally believed he meant what he'd said, none of the costs mattered. Not when Mina's fingers were pressed to the glass like she was trying to reach through it. Not when her eyes, always so guarded, were shining with something that looked dangerously like hope. He stepped back into the side room. Mina was on her feet before he'd fully opened the door. For a heartbeat she hesitated. Learned fear making her freeze, waiting to see which version of him had walked in. Then his face softened. Just a fraction. Just enough. Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She ran the few steps between them and collided with his legs, arms wrapping around his thigh, cheek pressed against the wool of his suit. Junho exhaled a breath he hadn't known he was holding. His hand came down, tentative at first, resting on her hair. When she didn't flinch, he let his fingers curl, cradling the back of her skull. Come here, he murmured. He lifted her easily, settling her on his hip like he used to when she was smaller and the world felt less hostile. She clung to his lapel with one hand, the other fisted in his tie. Nancy watched them, shoulders finally loosening a little. Some of the tension in her chest eased. She'd seen too many children look at their parents with fear. This wary, testing curve toward trust was rare. How did it go? She asked quietly. Junho looked over Mina's shoulder at her. His eyes were still sharp, still calculating, but the killing edge had been blunted by something quieter. I ended the alliance, he said. The Chua will take Su Min out of the country within 48 hours. She'll be under their control, not mine. She doesn't come near Mina again. And your father? Nancy asked. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He'll have opinions. That's one way to put it, she said dryly. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile. Not exactly. But the ghost of one. Mina tugged at his collar, drawing his attention back. She touched her chest, then his, then Nancy's. The hand signs were clumsy, but Nancy recognized the pattern. They'd been working on it for weeks. Us. Together. Junho's eyes softened. Yes, he said. Us. Nancy swallowed around the sudden tightness in her throat. He shifted Mina so he could hold out his free hand to Nancy. Not like a boss offering direction. Like a man offering something he wasn't used to giving. Let's go home, he said. The ride back to the penthouse was quiet. Mina sat between them in the back seat of the SUV, small hands resting on both their thighs as if physically anchoring them to her. The city slid past in streaks of neon and shadow, Manhattan's pulse muted behind bulletproof glass. Nancy watched the lights, the reflection of Junho's profile in the window, the hard line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand reflexively shifted every time the car turned, subtly bracing Mina. You know this isn't over, she said finally. I know, he replied. Chairman Park isn't going to ignore what you did tonight. You humiliated the Choi family. You chose your daughter over the alliance, over him. I did what he should have done, Junho said. If he has a problem with that, he can say it to my face. He will, Nancy said. The question is what he's willing to lose to prove he's still in control. There was a beat of silence. Then, I'm done being controlled, Junho said quietly. By him, by the elders, by any of them. They built this syndicate on the idea that feelings are weaknesses, that attachments are liabilities. His hand tightened over Mina's small fingers. They were wrong. Nancy studied him. The Ice King, cracking from the inside out. You're changing the rules, she said. No. His gaze stayed on the city. I'm reminding them who wrote them. Mina leaned against Nancy's shoulder, eyelids drooping. The adrenaline crash was finally hitting. Nancy shifted closer, letting the child's weight settle against her side. She's going to remember tonight, Nancy murmured. Not the meeting, not the negotiations. The fact that you walked away from power for her. Kids don't always understand the details, but they understand what they're chosen over. I chose wrong for 3 years, he said. There was no self-pity in it, just fact. Tonight doesn't erase that. No, Nancy agreed. But it's a start. The penthouse felt different when they stepped inside. Nothing had physically changed. The foyer was still all clean lines and expensive art, the air still carrying that faint mix of polished wood and money. But the energy was different, less brittle, less hollow. Mrs. Kim met them at the door, concern etched into the lines of her face. Is the little miss okay? She asked, eyes immediately tracking to Mina. Mina rubbed at her eyes, clearly exhausted. But when she saw the familiar housekeeper, she managed a small wave. She's had a long night, Nancy said, but she's safe. Mrs. Kim's gaze flicked between them. Junho holding Mina's hand, Nancy standing close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. Something in her expression softened. Her room is ready, she said. Fresh sheets. I took away what was damaged. A pause. I saved every piece of the silk, sajangnim, the dress. I didn't throw anything away. Junho's throat worked. Thank you. Mina tugged his hand insistently, then signed in quick, jerky motions toward Nancy. Nancy translated. She wants to know if I'm staying. Junho looked at Nancy. Are you? It should have been a simple question. It wasn't. She thought of the life she'd tried to build away from this world. The years spent learning how to help children without a gun in the room. The warning from Witsec. The threats. The little boy she hadn't been able to save. Then she looked at Mina. At the fading redness around her eyes. At the way she hovered closer to Nancy than anyone else. I'll stay tonight, Nancy said. She shouldn't wake up alone. Not just tonight. Mina signed in fast, imprecise movements, frustration creasing her small brow. Nancy understood anyway. You. Stay. Her heart twisted. She met Junho's eyes. We'll talk, she said. After you've dealt with your father. After we know what kind of war you're walking into. Not we, he said. Me. No. Her voice hardened. We. If you think I'm staying in the background while the man who ordered your child's vulnerability tries to keep his throne, you don't understand me as well as you think. His gaze held hers. The corner of his mouth lifted. Not in amusement, but in something like recognition. I'm starting to, he said. He walked Mina to her room himself. Nancy stayed in the doorway, watching as he tucked his daughter into fresh sheets. The shredded silk had been gathered into a neat bundle and placed beside her pillow. Mina reached for it, fingers threading through the soft, ruined fabric. I'll get you something new, he said quietly. Something that's yours, not just hers. Mina shook her head, pressed the silk to her chest. Nancy stepped in, her voice low. We can turn it into something else, she suggested. Not just a reminder of what was lost, a pillow or a quilt. Something that keeps your mother close without holding you hostage to the past. Mina considered this, then nodded once. A new story, stitched out of the old one. I'll have it done, Junho said. Exactly how you want it. Mina's hand moved again, small fingers sketching the familiar pattern in the air. Thank you. His breath caught. For a moment, he looked like he might crumble right there beside the bed. You're welcome, he said, voice rough. They left the door slightly ajar, soft light spilling into the hallway. Nancy walked beside him back toward the study. The air between them felt different now. Not just employer and employee, not even just allies, co-conspirators maybe, in something bigger than either of them had planned. At the study door, he hesitated. "My father will call," he said. "If he doesn't, he'll send someone. Either way, this doesn't end with tonight's meeting." "I know," Nancy said. "Tomorrow," he continued, "I go to him, to the estate, to the elders, to whoever else thinks Mina's life is a bargaining chip." His gaze was steady now, resolved. "I won't let my daughter live in a world where the man who ordered her suffering still sits at the head of the table." Nancy nodded slowly. "Then tomorrow," she said, "we stop pretending this is just about one cruel fiancé. We pull up the rot at the root." His eyes searched her face. "You're not afraid?" "I'm terrified," she said honestly. "But I'm more afraid of what happens if he wins." That earned her a real reaction. Small, but real. A huff of air that might have been a laugh in another life. "You should get some sleep," he said. "Use the guest room. I'll have someone bring you clothes." "I've slept in worse places," she said. "But I won't say no to an actual bed." She turned to go, then paused. "Junho?" He looked up at the sound of his name without the title. "What your father calls weakness," she said softly, "is exactly what's going to make you more dangerous than he's ever been. Men like him don't know how to fight someone who has something worth losing and refuses to lose it." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Good," he said, "because tomorrow he learns that." Nancy nodded, then slipped down the hallway toward the guest room. The soft padding of her footsteps swallowed by the penthouse's quiet. Junho stood alone in the doorway of his study for a moment longer. Then he stepped inside, closed the door, and picked up his phone. The call history stared back at him. His father's number near the top. The man who had told him since he could walk that emotion was a liability and family was currency. He didn't call. Not yet. Instead, he opened his encrypted files, pulled up accounts, shipment logs, offshore structures, names, numbers, evidence. If Chairman Park wanted to play architect of silence, erasing inconvenient women and fragile children for the sake of the bloodline, then tomorrow he would see what happened when the quiet son he'd underestimated his whole life stopped being quiet, when the Ice King brought the cold to his own house. And for the first time in 3 years, every move Junho planned, every angle he calculated, every piece he shifted on the board, wasn't for power. It was for a 9-year-old girl sleeping down the hall with shredded silk under her cheek, and for the woman who had bled to keep her alive. Tomorrow, he would go to his father. Tonight, he let himself stand in the middle of his own empire and feel fully the simple, terrifying truth. He was done obeying men who would kill his family in the name of saving it. The Park family estate sat 40 minutes north of the city, sprawling across manicured grounds that spoke of old money and older violence. Junho had grown up here, learning to fight in the marble halls, to negotiate in the library, to kill in the wine cellar where screams were swallowed by stone and earth. He'd sworn he'd never bring Mina here. Now he was walking through the front doors with Sumin in handcuffs and Nancy at his side, breaking every rule his father had spent decades enforcing. The foyer was exactly as he remembered. Cold, austere, designed to make visitors feel small. Chairman Park sat in the main receiving room, surrounded by 9 elders, whose combined age probably exceeded 3 centuries. They looked up as Junho entered, dragging Sumin behind him like a war prize. "You dare bring that woman here in chains?" Chairman Park's voice could freeze water. "Have you lost your mind along with your judgment?" "No," Junho said flatly. "I found both, along with evidence that you've been orchestrating my daughter's destruction for months." He threw a folder onto the table between them. Financial records, emails between Chairman Park and the head of security, instructions to handle the girl problem discreetly. The room went silent. "You disabled my security," Junho continued, his voice eerily calm. "You paid my own men to look the other way while your chosen bride tortured a 9-year-old child. You sanctioned this." "I did what was necessary," Chairman Park said, not denying it. "That child is damaged goods, nonverbal, traumatized, useless for carrying on the bloodline. The Choi alliance would have given you strong sons, legitimate heirs who could actually lead. She's my daughter. She's a liability that needed removing. The words landed like physical blows. Nancy felt her hands curl into fists, felt rage bubbling up her spine. This man, this patriarch, who claimed to value family above all else, had just admitted to orchestrating the systematic abuse of his own granddaughter. You knew, Junho said quietly. You knew what Soo-min was doing and you let it happen. You paid people to let it happen. I encouraged it. Chairman Park stood, his hanbok rustling with the movement. A mute girl has no place in this family. She brings shame, weakness. The syndicate needs strength, Junho. I thought 3 years of widowhood would have taught you that. Something flickered across Junho's face. What did you say? Your sentimentality over the first wife was already problematic. At least her death freed you to make better choices. The old man's tone was dismissive, like he was discussing a failed business venture rather than a woman's life. Nancy watched Junho's expression shift. The ice wasn't cracking. It was sublimating directly into something molten and deadly. The car accident, Junho said slowly. 3 years ago. The brake line failure that killed Mina's mother. That was supposed to kill Mina too, wasn't it? Chairman Park's silence was answer enough. You tried to murder them both. Junho's voice had gone flat. Empty. My wife and daughter. Your own blood. I tried to solve a problem before it became catastrophic, Chairman Park corrected. The girl survived, unfortunately, but at least the weak mother was removed. I gave you 3 years to accept reality and move on. Instead, you've let that damaged child make you soft. Junho moved so fast, 3 elders reached for weapons. But he wasn't attacking his father. Not yet. He was advancing on Soo-min, who'd been standing silent and smug throughout the exchange. You knew, he said to her. About the accident. About my father's involvement. Soo-min's perfect composure finally cracked. I knew you needed better. Deserved better. That woman was too Western, too soft. She was making you weak just like that mute spawn. She didn't get to finish. Because Soo-min, desperate and drowning, made the fatal mistake of thinking honesty would save her. I finished what your father started, she shrieked. The brake line wasn't enough. Your stupid wife saw the mechanic tampering with it and tried to leave the car. So I helped. I grabbed the wheel, made sure she went over the embankment instead of just stopping. The room froze. I did you a favor, Soo-min continued, her voice rising with hysteria. Just like I've been doing with the brat. Getting rid of the weak ones so you could finally become what you were meant to be. And I would have succeeded if this. She gestured venomously at Nancy. This outsider hadn't interfered. The details spilled out like poison. How Soo-min had been obsessed with Junho for years. How she'd volunteered to help Chairman Park's plan by making sure the accident was fatal. How she'd spent 3 years positioning herself as the perfect replacement, waiting for the alliance to be arranged. She was weak, Soo-min spat. Your daughter is weak. But I could give you strong sons, perfect heirs. I was doing what needed to be done. Junho's gun was out before anyone could blink, pressed against Soo-min's forehead. Wait, Chairman Park's voice cracked like a whip. You can't. Give me one reason. Because killing her means killing your heir. She's pregnant, Junho. She told me 3 days ago. Confirmed by the family doctor. Junho's hand didn't waver. She's lying. The test was positive. The doctor verified it. In our world, that child, your child, is protected by blood oath. You know the law. Kill the mother of your heir, and the elders have the right to execute you in return. Chairman Park's voice carried absolute certainty. Lower the weapon. We'll figure out how to contain this, but you cannot kill her. The other elders shifted, hands moving toward concealed weapons. The message was clear. Shoot Soo-min, and they'd shoot him. Junho had built his empire on calculated risks. He knew when he was trapped. His finger tensed on the trigger anyway. Then Nancy stepped forward from where she'd been standing silent in the doorway's shadow. She's not pregnant, Nancy said quietly. The family doctor only saw the lab numbers. Elevated HCG, no context. He never ran a full panel. She fed him exactly what she wanted him to see. Every head turned toward her. "You don't get to speak here," Chairman Park snarled. "You're nothing. Hired help who's forgotten her place." "I'm a woman who's very good at reading medical waste," Nancy replied, her voice steady despite 9 guns now tracking toward her. She pulled a crumpled receipt from her pocket, smoothing it against her thigh. "This is from a fertility clinic in Midtown. Prescription-grade HCG injections. 9,000 units. Enough to trigger positive pregnancy tests for weeks." She tossed the paper onto the table, followed by 3 empty injection vials she'd carefully preserved. "I found these in Suman's bathroom 3 days ago when I was cleaning. She's been injecting synthetic pregnancy hormone to fake the test results." Nancy's gaze was clinical, detached. "The nausea she's been performing? Timing her morning sickness for when you'd notice? It's an act. A calculated performance to create exactly this scenario, where she'd be protected by blood oath from consequences." Suman's face drained of color. She's lying. She planted those. I'm carrying his heir." "Then take a blood test," Nancy said simply. "Real pregnancy shows different hormone ratios than injection-induced false positives. Any legitimate lab can distinguish between them in under an hour." Silence. Chairman Park picked up the vials, examining them with the care of a man who'd spent decades navigating deception. His expression darkened. "These are real," he said slowly. "Pharmaceutical grade, dated from 2 weeks ago." "She's desperate," one of the elders observed. "Falsifying pregnancy to invoke blood protection. He trailed off, the implications settling over the room like ash. Because faking pregnancy to avoid execution wasn't just deception. In their world, it was one of the worst forms of blasphemy, manipulating the very laws that held the syndicate together. The protection over Sumin evaporated like morning mist. Junho's gun never moved from her forehead, but his eyes shifted to Nancy. Questions flickered there. How long had she known? Why had she kept this evidence instead of presenting it immediately? What else was she hiding? But those were conversations for later. Right now, there was only the woman who'd murdered his wife and tried to destroy his daughter, finally stripped of every defense. "Wait." Suman's composure shattered completely. "Please, I did it for us. For the family. Your father wanted." "My father," Junho interrupted, his voice colder than Nancy had ever heard it, "is going to watch what happens when you betray me, when you touch my daughter, when you murder my wife." His finger tightened on the trigger. Then the windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. The world became noise and chaos. Nancy moved on instinct, dropping low as bullets chewed through antique furniture and priceless artwork. She grabbed the nearest elder, an ancient man who'd been frozen in shock, and hauled him behind the overturned table. "Stay down!" she shouted over the gunfire. The old man stared at her like she'd grown a second head, but he stayed down. Through the haze of gun smoke and splintered wood, Nancy caught glimpses of the attack. At least a dozen men, moving with military precision, pouring through shattered windows and doorways. Not rivals trying to take advantage of chaos. This was coordinated, professional. Someone had known exactly when and where to strike. Junho had shoved his father behind cover with one hand while returning fire with the other, his movements fluid and practiced. But they were surrounded, outgunned, and whoever had planned this had done it well. "Code Black!" Chairman Park's voice cut through the chaos, triggering something Nancy didn't understand. Until she did, when she'd called Junho from the penthouse. Frantic and terrified, she'd used the emergency line. What she hadn't known was that calling that number automatically triggered the syndicate's nuclear option. A silent, network-wide alert that the Parks were in Code Black. Chairman Park's shout now was the second half of that protocol, ordering every man on the estate into full war footing. She'd accidentally started a war, and now everyone with an agenda against the Parks was descending on the estate, trying to take advantage of what they thought was a vulnerability. "This is your fault!" Suman screamed at Nancy from where she'd collapsed behind an overturned piano. "You stupid!" A bullet punched through the wood 6 inches from Suman's head, cutting off whatever venom she'd been about to spew. Nancy's mind raced, cataloging angles and threats with the kind of tactical assessment that had nothing to do with being a maid or a psychologist. She counted attackers, noted their formation, recognized the pattern of their assault. Mercenaries. High-end ones. Someone had hired professional killers to finish what Su-min and Chairman Park had started. The question was, who? Movement caught her eye. A gunman flanking around the room's perimeter, using smoke and chaos as cover, his weapon trained on Junho's unprotected back. No one else saw him. Junho was focused forward, defending his position. The elders were pinned down. The gunman's finger tightened on the trigger. Nancy moved. She didn't think, didn't hesitate. Just grabbed the pistol from the dead elder lying 3 feet away. The man had caught a stray bullet in the first seconds of the assault, and raised it in one smooth motion. The weight felt familiar in her hands. Wrong and right at the same time. She'd sworn she'd never touch a gun again. She fired twice. Double tap. Center mass. The gunman dropped. Junho spun toward the sound, his expression shifting from combat focus to shock when he saw Nancy standing there. Weapon still raised. Stance perfect. Not the stance of someone who'd taken a basic self-defense class. The stance of someone who'd been trained by professionals, who'd grown up around violence, who knew exactly how to kill efficiently and without hesitation. "Who the hell are you?" one of the elders shouted at her. Nancy didn't answer. She was already moving, using the momentary lull in gunfire to assess their situation. 3 exits, all compromised. Approximately 15 hostiles still active, probably more waiting outside. Limited ammunition among the defenders. They were going to lose this fight if they stayed here. "The wine cellar," she said sharply to Junho. "It's reinforced. Designed as a safe room during Prohibition. There's a tunnel that leads to the garage." "How do you know that?" Chairman Park demanded. "Because my father helped build it 40 years ago when he worked as your enforcer." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "James Curtis. You probably remember him. He was very good at making problems disappear until he tried to disappear himself and you had him killed for it." The revelation hung in the air for half a second before another volley of gunfire forced everyone back down. Junho's eyes met Nancy's across the chaos. Understanding flickered there. She wasn't just a maid who'd gotten lucky with a job placement. She was the daughter of one of his father's former soldiers. She'd grown up in this life, knew its secrets, and had been hiding in plain sight for 6 months. "Later," he said, the word a promise. "We're talking about this later. If we survive," Nancy agreed. They moved as a unit. Junho, Nancy, Chairman Park, and 3 surviving elders. Su-min stumbled after them, still handcuffed, screaming about being left behind until one of the elders grabbed her arm and hauled her along. The wine cellar door was concealed behind a false panel in the library. Nancy triggered it from muscle memory, her hands finding the mechanism without conscious thought. The passage opened onto stairs, descending into darkness. "Go!" Junho barked, providing covering fire as the others descended. Nancy went last, pulling the door closed behind her just as bullets punched through the wood where her head had been seconds before. The tunnel was exactly as she remembered from childhood. Narrow, damp, lit by emergency bulbs that cast everything in sickly yellow. Her father had brought her down here once, shown her the escape route, made her memorize it. "In this life," he'd said, "you always need a way out." She hadn't understood then, hadn't wanted to understand. Now, running through the darkness with gunfire echoing above them, she understood perfectly. They emerged in the garage, which was mercifully empty of hostiles. Junho's men had secured it, forming a defensive perimeter. But the relief was short-lived, because standing in the center of the garage, blocking their path to the vehicles, was someone Nancy recognized. Her uncle, her father's brother, the man who'd inherited James Curtis's position after his death, and he was pointing a gun directly at Chairman Park. "Hello, little niece," Uncle Tony said, his voice carrying false warmth. "I wondered if you'd recognize the old escape route. Your father would be proud." "Tony." Nancy's voice was steady, despite her racing heart. "You're behind this." "Behind what?" "Finishing what should have been done years ago?" He gestured with the gun toward Chairman Park. "This man ordered your father killed. Erased him like he never existed. And you've been working in his son's house, cleaning his toilets, pretending to be nothing. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? I thought you were dead," Nancy admitted. "The report said you died in Singapore 3 years ago." Reports lie. I've been very much alive, waiting, planning. His eyes shifted to Junho. Your father destroyed my family. Now I'm going to destroy his. He pulled the trigger, but he wasn't aiming at Chairman Park. He was aiming at Junho. Nancy moved without thinking, her body responding to instinct and training she'd tried to bury. She slammed into Junho, knocking him sideways as the bullet carved through the space where his chest had been. They hit the concrete hard, Nancy's injured arm screaming in protest. But they were alive. Her uncle smiled. Still protecting the wrong people, I see. You hired mercenaries to attack your own people, Nancy said, struggling to her feet. You triggered Code Black knowing it would bring chaos. You're not avenging my father. You're using his death as an excuse for a power grab. Smart girl, but not smart enough. Tony's gun tracked toward her now. You should have stayed gone, little niece. Should have kept running instead of playing house with the enemy. She's not the enemy, Junho said quietly, moving to stand beside Nancy despite her attempt to keep him behind cover. And neither am I. Your father. My father is a monster who ordered the death of his own granddaughter, who sanctioned torture and murder in the name of tradition. Junho's voice carried absolute conviction, but I'm not him, and I won't pay for his sins. Noble words from a man neck-deep in blood. Not noble, practical. Junho gestured around the garage. You think killing us ends this? You think the syndicate will accept a coup built on hired mercenaries and broken protocols? You'll be dead within a week. Tony hesitated, calculation flickering in his eyes. That's when Su-min, who'd been silent and terrified in the corner, made her move. She lunged for the nearest gun, dropped by one of the dead guards, and came up firing wildly. Not at Tony, not at the mercenaries still potentially hunting them. At Nancy. You ruined everything, Su-min shrieked, her aim terrible but her intent clear. Everything. I would have been perfect. I would have given him everything he needed. Bullets punched into concrete, into walls, into everything except Nancy, who'd already moved. But one shot went wide, hit a fuel tank. The explosion wasn't massive, but it was enough. Enough to throw everyone to the ground. Enough to trigger the automatic fire suppression systems. Enough to turn the garage into chaos. When the smoke cleared, Tony was gone. Slipped away in the confusion, along with whatever mercenaries he'd brought. Su-min lay unconscious against a support pillar, a head wound bleeding freely. And standing over her, weapon drawn, breathing hard, was Mina. The little girl shouldn't have been here. She was supposed to be safe in the penthouse, guarded by Mrs. Kim and the household staff Junho trusted. She was supposed to be as far from this violence as possible. Instead, Mina stood in the smoking ruins of the garage, a small pistol clutched in both hands, her pajamas splattered with someone else's blood. Mina? Junho started forward, his voice cracked with horror and relief and a dozen other emotions. His daughter's eyes met his, wide, terrified, but not surprised. She'd known where to find them, had somehow followed them here, had witnessed everything, and she was holding the gun that had likely saved their lives. One final wild shot from Su-min had been heading directly for Nancy's head before something had deflected it, before someone small and determined had thrown themselves into the trajectory. Nancy knelt slowly, bringing herself to Mina's eye level, her movements careful and non-threatening. "Sweet girl," she said softly, "can you put the gun down for me?" Mina's hands were shaking so badly the weapon wavered. But she lowered it, let Nancy gently take it from her small fingers. Then she collapsed, not unconscious. Worse. A full-blown panic attack, her small body seizing with hyperventilation, hands clawing at her throat like she couldn't breathe. Nancy gathered her close immediately, applying the pressure techniques that had worked before, grounding the child through touch and quiet words. "You're safe. I've got you. Breathe with me. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4. Junho dropped beside them, one hand on his daughter's back, the other braced against the concrete like he might collapse himself. "How is she here?" he asked, the words barely audible over the dying echoes of gunfire. "I don't know," Nancy answered honestly, keeping her focus on Mina's breathing. "Mrs. Kim would never." She followed the tracker. The voice came from the garage entrance. Mrs. Kim herself stood there, disheveled and bleeding from a cut on her forehead, but alive. I told her no, locked her in her room. But the child is more resourceful than we thought. She has a phone. One of the old ones you gave her for emergencies. She tracked your location and called a car service. A 9-year-old called an Uber? One of the surviving elders sounded incredulous. A 9-year-old who's been watching adults manipulate technology her entire life. Mrs. Kim corrected. She can't speak, Sejong Nim. But she's not stupid. She knew you were in danger. She came to help. Junho looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the broken, helpless child everyone kept insisting she was, but someone fierce, someone determined, someone who'd traveled across the city into an active war zone because the people she loved were in danger. Mina, he whispered. She pulled back from Nancy slightly, her breathing still ragged but more controlled. Her hands moved in quick, desperate gestures. You were going to die. I heard the phone call. Heard Nancy say they were attacking. I couldn't let you die. Oh, baby. Junho pulled her fully into his arms, no longer caring who saw, no longer maintaining the Ice King facade. You could have been killed. You could have. I don't care. Her hands were fierce, emphatic. You're my apa. I don't care. The words, signed, not spoken, but no less powerful, broke something in him. The last wall, the final defense. He held his daughter and let himself break. Just for a moment. Just enough to start healing. Then sirens cut through the moment. Multiple sirens. Police, fire, probably federal agents given the scale of the violence. Someone had called it in. Probably neighbors. Possibly Tony Curtis himself, setting up one final trap. Chairman Park, who'd been silent throughout the garage confrontation, finally spoke. We need to leave. Now. Before law enforcement arrives and makes this complicated. It's already complicated, Nancy pointed out, standing with Mina cradled against her hip. You can't just walk away from a war zone without questions. Watch me. The old man's voice carried absolute authority. This is what we do. This is what we've always done. We disappear the evidence. We control the narrative. No. Junho's voice cut through his father's. We don't. Not this time. Chairman Park's face darkened. You don't get to make that choice. Yes, I do. Because I'm done protecting people who hurt my daughter. I'm done covering up crimes in the name of family. Junho stood, still holding Mina, and faced his father fully. You tried to kill her mother, sanctioned months of abuse and torture, and you want me to help you escape consequences? You're my son. I'm her father first. The words were final. Absolute. And that means you're done. The elders can decide what to do with you. But I won't protect you. Not anymore. The old man's expression cycled through shock, rage, and finally something that might have been respect. You're choosing her over the syndicate, over everything we built. I'm choosing her over everything, Junho confirmed, including you. Chairman Park nodded slowly. Then you're no son of mine. Good. Because you were never the father I needed. The words hung in the air as police cars pulled up outside, as federal agents began securing the perimeter, as the world Junho had grown up in started its final collapse. He didn't care. He had his daughter in his arms. He had Nancy at his side. Everything else could burn. The interrogation rooms at the FBI field office were designed to be uncomfortable. Cold metal chairs, harsh fluorescent lighting, cameras in every corner recording everything. Junho sat in one with his lawyer. A man so expensive and connected, he'd made 3 federal agents nervous just by showing up. Nancy sat in another, alone. Because apparently child psychologists turned maids turned reluctant combat participants didn't warrant legal representation unless they asked for it. She hadn't asked. Mina was in a 3rd room, technically, but room was generous. It was actually a family observation space with toys and soft furniture, designed for interviewing child witnesses. Mrs. Kim sat with her, and through the one-way glass, Nancy could see the little girl clutching her reconstructed silk, watching the door like she expected monsters to burst through at any moment. The questioning had been going on for 4 hours. 4 hours of carefully dancing around the truth, of explaining just enough to avoid obstruction charges while revealing nothing that would destroy what was left of the Park family's legitimate businesses, of watching federal agents try to crack the syndicate's outer shell and bounce off like insects hitting bulletproof glass. They wanted someone to blame for the attack. They wanted to connect the Park family to organized crime. They wanted Junho to flip on his associates, to trade information for immunity, to burn everything his father had built in exchange for his freedom. What they didn't understand was that Junho was already burning it, just more strategically. My client, the expensive lawyer said for the 16th time, was the victim of an unprovoked attack on his family estate. He defended himself and others present using legally owned firearms. He's cooperating fully with your investigation into the mercenary assault. But these questions about syndicate operations are outside the scope of tonight's events. The lead agent, a woman named Torres with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, leaned forward. Your family estate had enough weapons to supply a small army. We found evidence of at least 3 separate criminal organizations involved in tonight's attack. And you want me to believe Mr. Park is just an innocent businessman? I want you to believe that my client is the victim here. His home was attacked. His family was threatened. His 9-year-old daughter. The lawyer's voice hardened. Witnessed violence that will require years of therapy. If you're planning to charge him with anything, do it now. Otherwise, we're leaving. Torres looked like she wanted to argue, but they both knew the truth. Without concrete evidence tying Junho to specific crimes, all they had was speculation and circumstantial connections, and his lawyer was too good to let those gain traction. Fine, Torres said finally. But we'll be watching, Mr. Park. Whatever game you're playing with the old guard, with rival families, with your father's legacy, we'll be watching. Then you'll see a man trying to protect his daughter, Junho said quietly. Nothing more complicated than that. He stood, adjusted his blood-stained suit, and walked out. In the observation room, Nancy was getting similar pressure. Your uncle orchestrated tonight's attack, a different agent said, his tone almost sympathetic. Tony Curtis, former enforcer for the Park Syndicate, supposedly killed 3 years ago in Singapore. Except he wasn't dead. He was planning this. And you expect us to believe you had no idea? I hadn't seen my uncle since I was 12, Nancy said truthfully. I thought he was dead. My entire family thought he was dead. If I'd known he was alive, she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, I would have stayed much further away from anything connected to the Parks. But you didn't stay away. You took a job as their maid. I took a job as a maid, period. I didn't know the family's background when I accepted the position. I just needed work. The lies came easily, smoothly, practiced. If I'd known I was walking into organized crime, I would have run. Would you? The agent's eyes were knowing. Because the footage we've reviewed, from the estate's remaining security cameras, shows you moving like someone with combat training, shooting like someone who's done it before, protecting Junho Park like you had a personal stake in keeping him alive. Nancy met his gaze steadily. I protected a man who was being shot at. That's called being a decent human being. And yes, my father taught me to shoot when I was young, before he died, before I tried to build a life that had nothing to do with violence. Until tonight. Until tonight, she agreed. When violence found me anyway. So if you're planning to charge me with anything, please do it now. Otherwise, I'd like to go check on the traumatized child I've been caring for. The agent studied her for a long moment. Then he slid a business card across the table. If you remember anything, if Tony Curtis contacts you, if you decide you want to talk about what really happened in that house, he tapped the card. Call me. Nancy pocketed it without comment and walked out. They met in the waiting area. Junho, Nancy, Mrs. Kim, and Mina. The little girl launched herself at both of them simultaneously, wrapping one arm around Nancy's waist and the other around her father's leg. Let's go home, Junho said quietly. But home wasn't the penthouse anymore. Home was a temporary safe house 30 miles outside the city, arranged through the lawyer's contacts, where they could regroup and figure out what came next. The drive was silent except for Mina's quiet breathing as she dozed between them. finally feeling safe enough to sleep. "Your father?" Nancy asked eventually. "In federal custody for now. They'll charge him with something. Conspiracy, weapons violations, maybe more if they can connect him to historical crimes. He'll probably cut a deal." Junho's voice was empty. "I don't care. He's not my concern anymore." "And Sumin? Critical condition. Even if she survives, she's facing attempted murder charges. Multiple counts." His hand tightened on the steering wheel. "Also not my concern." "And Tony Curtis?" "Disappeared. But he won't stay hidden long. Men like him, men with grudges, they can't help themselves. They have to come back. Have to finish what they started." Junho glanced at her. "He'll come for you eventually. You know that." "I know," Nancy said quietly. "But at least now I see him coming." They pulled up to the safe house. A sprawling property hidden behind gates and trees, isolated enough that approaching vehicles would be visible from half a mile away. Mrs. Kim took Mina inside to get her cleaned up and put to bed properly. That left Junho and Nancy standing in the driveway, the weight of everything that had happened settling over them. "You lied to the FBI," Junho observed. "You noticed. I notice everything about you." His eyes were intense in the darkness. "You knew exactly what you were doing tonight. The combat training, the tactical awareness, the way you moved through that tunnel like you'd mapped it years ago. That's not something you pick up from a father who taught you to shoot when you were young." "No," Nancy admitted. "It's not. So who are you really?" She was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth to give him. Then she decided that after bleeding together, fighting together, nearly dying together, he'd earned it. "My father was James Curtis, your father's enforcer for 15 years. He was very good at his job. Too good, eventually. He saw things he wasn't supposed to see, learned things he wasn't supposed to know. And when he tried to use that information to get out, to take me somewhere safe, your father had him killed." "How old were you?" 12. "Old enough to understand what happened. Old enough to be terrified. My mother died when I was born, so it was just us. After he died, my uncle took me in, trained me, said I needed to know how to survive in this world. But you ran anyway. I ran when I was 18, changed my name, buried every connection to the Curtis family, got degrees, built a legitimate career, convinced myself I could be someone else." Nancy's laugh was bitter. "Then I saw Mina's case file, saw her symptoms, saw the park name, and I couldn't walk away." "Why?" Junho moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him in the cold night air. "Why come back to the family that destroyed yours?" "Because Mina isn't you, isn't your father, isn't responsible for any of it." Nancy met his eyes. "She's just a little girl who needed someone to see her, really see her, and I couldn't let her drown because of her last name." "You saved her." "We saved her," Nancy corrected. "You made the choices that mattered. You walked away from power, from your father, from everything you'd built. That took more courage than anything I did." "I'm not courageous. I'm just—" He stopped, searching for words. "Tired of being cold?" Nancy suggested softly. "Yes." The admission seemed to cost him. "Tired of being the Ice King. Tired of calculating every move. Tired of living like feelings are weaknesses and love is a liability. And now? Now I want." He reached out, his scarred hand cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "I want to be warm. Want to feel something other than rage and calculation. Want to." She kissed him before he could finish the sentence. It wasn't gentle. Wasn't soft. It was desperate and real and tasted like gun smoke and fear and relief at still being alive. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she went willingly, pressing against him like she could crawl inside his skin. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Nancy rested her forehead against his. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered. "Probably the worst one I've ever had," he agreed. "Your world is violent, dangerous, everything I ran from." "I know, and I'm the daughter of a man your father murdered. There are probably 10 different syndicate rules against this. I don't care about the rules anymore." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I care about you, about Mina, about building something that doesn't require us to be monsters." Can you do that? Really walk away from all of it? I can try. His voice was raw, honest. With you, if you'll stay. Nancy thought about running, about disappearing again, about building another life somewhere far from men with guns and blood-soaked empires. Then she thought about Mina's small hand in hers, about the way Junho's careful coldness had thawed into something human, about the fact that she'd spent 3 years hiding from her own history and had still ended up here, still ended up fighting for something that mattered. I'll stay, she said finally. But on one condition. Name it. No more secrets, no more calculations. If we do this, if we try to build something real, we do it honestly, even when it's hard, even when the truth is ugly. Junho nodded slowly. Deal. Starting with this truth. I'm falling for you. Have been since you bled for my daughter. Maybe before, and that terrifies me more than anything else that's happened tonight. Nancy's breath caught. That's surprisingly honest. You said no more secrets. His smile was small, uncertain, entirely unlike the Ice King who'd walked into that nursery, what felt like years ago. I'm trying. She kissed him again, softer this time, a promise rather than desperation. Then keep trying. We'll figure out the rest as we go. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, two people who'd survived violence and loss and systemic cruelty, deciding to be something other than survivors. Inside the safe house, a small voice interrupted their moment. Not signed, not gestured. Spoken. Appa? Mina's voice was tiny, rusty from years of disuse, but unmistakably real. Nancy? They broke apart, both frozen in shock. Junho moved first, running toward the door. Nancy followed, her heart pounding. Mina stood in the hallway, Mrs. Kim beside her with tears streaming down her face. The little girl looked terrified, with of her own voice, maybe, or of the change it represented. She tried again, the word clumsy and uncertain. I was scared you left. Junho dropped to his knees in front of her, his composure finally, completely shattered. We're not leaving, never again, I promise. Mina's small hands came up, touching his face like she was checking he was real. You came back. You fought for me. You chose me. Always, he said fiercely. Always you. Over everything. Over everyone. She threw her arms around his neck, and Junho held his daughter and let himself cry. Real tears. Not the controlled emotion of a syndicate head, but the raw grief and relief of a father who'd almost lost everything that mattered. Nancy watched them, her own vision blurring. 3 months. That's how long it had been since that night. 3 months since the FBI had grudgingly closed their investigation for lack of evidence. 3 months since Chairman Park had pled guilty to conspiracy and been sentenced to 20 years. 3 months since Soo-min had been deported back to Korea to face charges there. 3 months since Tony Curtis had vanished into whatever hole he'd crawled out of, leaving nothing but threats and promises of return. 3 months of therapy for Mina, of rebuilding trust, of learning to be a family instead of survivors sharing space. The penthouse had been sold. Too many ghosts, too many bad memories. They'd bought a house instead, smaller, warmer, filled with light and soft surfaces and all the things Mina needed to feel safe. Junho had stepped back from active syndicate leadership, maintaining just enough connections to keep them protected, while divesting from everything that reminded him of his father's empire. He was rebuilding, not the park's criminal organization, but legitimate businesses that didn't require bloodshed to maintain. It was slower, harder, less profitable in the short term, but he slept better, smiled more, spent his evenings reading to his daughter instead of planning territorial expansions. Nancy had gone back to school, not to practice. She'd lost her license years ago when she disappeared, but to teach, to help other people recognize and respond to child abuse before it escalated, to make sure what had happened to Mina didn't happen to others. And in the quiet moments, in the spaces between rebuilding and healing, they built something else, something neither of them had names for yet, something that looked like love but felt more complicated, more earned. Now, standing in their new kitchen, while Mina practiced writing at the table, Her speech was improving daily, but writing came easier. Nancy watched Junho attempt to cook breakfast and thought about how far they'd come. "You're burning the eggs," she observed. "I'm creating them," he corrected without looking up. "With extra char for flavor. That's called burning. You're very critical for someone who ate 3 of my burned pancakes yesterday." "I was being polite." "You licked the plate," Mina giggled. An actual sound, bright and real. And signed something too quick for Nancy to catch. "She says you're both ridiculous," Junho translated, his Korean getting better as Mina used it more. "And that she wants the burned eggs because they taste like love." Nancy's throat tightened. "She did not say that last part. She implied it," he said solemnly. Then softer. "But she's right. Everything I make tastes like love now, even when it's objectively terrible." "That's the worst line I've ever heard. And yet you're smiling." She was. She really was. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. All 3 of them tensed, old instincts dying hard. But it was just the mail, dropped off early by a carrier who knew better than to linger at the house with the very alert security system. Junho sorted through it while Mina returned to her writing and Nancy salvaged what she could of breakfast. Then he went still. "What?" Nancy asked, recognizing the tension in his shoulders. He held up a single envelope. No return address, foreign postage, expensive paper. Inside was a photograph of Mina. Recent. Taken from across the street from her new school. And a note in Korean that Nancy couldn't read, but Junho translated in a voice like winter. "The Curtis family remembers. We'll be seeing you soon. M.C. Tony." Still out there. Still watching. Still waiting. The moment should have been terrifying. Should have sent them back into panic mode. Should have shattered the peace they'd been carefully building. Instead, Junho set the photo down, looked at Nancy and Mina, to his family, chosen and protected and loved, and smiled. Not the Ice King's smile. Not cold or calculated. Just fierce, determined, ready. "Let him come," Junho said quietly. "We survived worse. We'll survive him too." Nancy moved to his side, her hand finding his. "Together, together," he agreed. Mina looked up from her writing, saw their joined hands, and smiled her small, careful smile. Then she went back to work, carefully forming letters that spelled out, "Wadajaran," my family. And in that moment, surrounded by burned eggs and morning light and the promise of threats they'd face together, they were whole, imperfect, complicated, built from broken pieces and blood-soaked histories, but whole. And Tony, Curtis, and anyone else who thought they could destroy what they'd built, was about to learn exactly what happened when you threatened a family that had already survived hell. They'd survived the cold, now they were the fire.